So this is the man himself doing his retail politics. This is several years later, so he's already been now president for 3 years or so, maybe 4. And this is outside the same mosque in Narmak, and he has just voted in another election, and so we thought we'd catch him here. And you see there are lots and lots of journalists, but there are also lots and lots of people. But what I want you to really see is in the same series of pictures, this one. Who's ever seen a president with a pen in their hand? Unless it's someone like Obama who's using 30 pens to sign a piece of legislation. It never happens. This president has a handful of letters that he's just received from people, and he received so many letters, 19 million, in the first 4 or 5 years of his presidency. They had to create a whole office, the Office of Letters, to deal with the letters that people were writing to the president. And this became, in some ways it became a joke. In other ways it became it became kind of an avenue for people to communicate with the president. And through this, the president's office would answer virtually every single one of these letters. They would put money in some of them and hand them back to people and try and solve their problems. But here, the president was literally writing down the details, the names, the telephone numbers of some of the people who were there. There might be a lady who's there, so I got this problem, sir, and he'd be taking down their phone number. He made the mistake once of giving out his direct line during one of these moments, and his phone was clogged for months, right? So he could, of course, very naive in some respects, to have an office like this, but receiving many, many letters, and to give you an idea about how he plays a crowd like this, and don't underestimate this, because again, Iran has never seen a president like this. In this particular group, I had my translator listening very, very carefully because I don't speak Farsi. But he was listening to all of the back and forth, and then we spoke to some of the people afterwards who'd given letters and asked them why it was, what they said in their letters. And Ahmadinejad would say things like, people would be shouting, "Mr. President, Mr. President," and he'd say, "Well, take a number, just wait." And one lady said, "Mr. President, you didn't answer my letter." Well, that got his attention. So he said, "Well, what did you say in your letter?" And she said, she said, "My 2 sons are in Azerbaijan in medical school, and I asked you if they could have seats in Iran, be in medical school in Iran." And he said, "I did answer your letter." And basically, there aren't seats in the medical, there isn't room for them here. And, that's a problem that we have. There just aren't enough seats, and so, sorry, but I did answer your letter. So he turns away and deals with somebody else. And the lady says, "Mr. President, that is not good enough." Okay, now by this time the crowd is also kind of like, who is she anyway? They're getting a little bit antsy about it. So Ahmadinejad plays on this perfectly. He turns around and he says, "Hey, why are your sons in Azerbaijan anyway? I mean, why aren't they in Iran, the homeland, the motherland, the font of all goodness?" That was played perfectly. And it gives you an example, that's just one of many, many examples of how Ahmadinejad plays a crowd. Now that's not to say that right now, right today, he's not locked in a very, very fierce battle against many, many enemies, because he also has proven to be the most divisive president that Iran has ever had in its 32 years of the Islamic Republic. This is just to give you an idea of the kind of supporters that Ahmadinejad would have in the election in 2009. This is a shop that's got that's selling parts for for coolers, refrigeration devices, things like that. It's pretty lowbrow, kind of hole-in-the-wall type places, providing the basic bare necessities. This is the kind of place that might be supportive of the main opponent, which is Mir Hossein Mousavi. You see him here on the left. He is, of course, the one who believes he won, and I believe he won, and many, many, many Iranians believe he won, the election in 2009. That was the election that Ahmadinejad was declared the winner in. And we're going to talk more about that because that has everything to do with the Arab Spring. But in any event, this is just to give you an idea. What kind of place supports someone like Mir Hossein Mousavi? Well, that's a toy shop. Lots and lots of colorful things that come from Dubai, they've come from the United States, they've come from all over the place. And one other thing too, which I'll just point out, made a big impact in Iran. You'll notice that Mr. Mousavi here is holding his wife's hand in public. Now, never mind they've been married for 40 years or something like that, but this just had never taken place in Iran, and he received a lot of votes from women for that, because of that picture. I mean, his wife is a fully fledged PhD. She was the director of the university. I mean, in Iran, they've had female vice presidents. You can't be president if you're a woman, but you can do just about everything else in a lot of ways. In any event, that was a brilliant tactical move after that election. So you recognize this man, Mr. Hatami, elected by a landslide in 1997, elected again by a landslide in 2001, but also hasted with the failures of the reform movement after that. He was never able to win against the hardliners, and basically when he left office in 2005, people were not respecting him as much as they did. Now, early on in this election in 2009, he said he would run again for president because there was no kind of reformist alternative candidate. So this is a picture that was taken just a couple of days after he made this announcement. And you can see he's getting roughed up a little bit, in fact, quite a bit. And this happened to coincide with the anniversary again, in this case, of the revolution itself. This must have been the 29th or the 30th anniversary. So this means hundreds of thousands of Iranians are out on the streets going to the central Freedom Square, Meydan Azadi. And Hatami gets in this group, and as soon as he starts walking, and many of the candidates did this in different places, as soon as he starts walking, all of a sudden we started to have supporters coming up and chanting and cheering, and some of them saying how nicely dressed he is, because he was, you can see, he looks immaculate. And then you also had other people who were very much against him, who were shouting, "Death to the one who's against the regime, death to the one who's against the leader." And these guys started coming with sticks. Now this crowd is so tight we can hardly move. Really tight. And back on the left, you get a taste of what his security people started to look like when they started to lose control. They couldn't believe what was going to happen. They really feared for Hatami's life in this instance, because these hardliners started coming up. You see this guy on the right shouting straight in his face, and he's actually putting his glasses back on because someone's thrown wads of paper, knocked his glasses off. It was a tricky moment. So anyway, by pure chance, Hatami comes back into this little kiosk, and he finds a chair to sit down in, which isn't a small thing because the crowd's actually destroyed all the other plastic chairs that are around. So his security guards are trying to prevent people from coming into this kiosk, and I, by chance, with my cameras, happen to be around this back corner, and I kind of block a little bit these guys coming from, just gently, no one really knows. But anyway, so I was doing that, and Hatami sits down, his glasses are steamed up, and he's a very unhappy man. And instinctively, I reach out to shake his hand, and he takes my hand. And the moment I touched his hand, I could see that this was a man who did not want to be there, who was very, very afraid, because this was the hand of a philosopher. It was so soft. He was not ready for the hurly-burly brutalities that this election campaign was going to bring about. And in fact, he begged it after just a few weeks, because then Mousavi said he would run, and so Hatami pulled out. He was not ready for that. But that's just to give you an idea how vicious politics in Iran can be. They've only become more vicious in the meantime. So this isn't what you probably think. This is inside this car is Mousavi. By pure chance, I happen to be 800 miles south of Tehran in a town called Birjan. It used to be an Ahmadinejad stronghold when Mousavi arrived unannounced for a campaign rally. And here, people, they were so pleased to see him. People were taking babies, holding up babies, to him as if to be blessed. And they also sacrificed some cows and some sheep and took the blood and put it in a kind of a protected way, as a blessing almost, on the car. He had an amazing rally there, really, in my mind, putting paid to this idea that that Ahmadinejad controlled the countryside. We always hear that Ahmadinejad had all the votes in the countryside. That's not true at all. War veterans, a lot of other people who had met Ahmadinejad during his presidency told me, Mousavi's our guy. He can be a savior. Ahmadinejad has done nothing for us despite all his talk. So this is what we saw just in the days leading up to the election in 2009. Here, these are the kind of street parties that are going on in Tehran. And to give you an idea about the unlikely nature of Mousavi's campaign, the reason probably that he was allowed to run was because this was the boringest former prime minister in all of Iran. I mean, he could catch nobody's imagination or set anything on fire. I'm sure that was the original thinking when he was actually allowed to run. But in the 10 days before the election, his candidacy caught fire, and all of a sudden you have these like 16-year-old girls, who of course could vote too, out there screaming as if the Beatles were there waiting for him. So anyway, this made the supreme leader, of course, Ahmadinejad, very, very nervous about the result. Very unlikely. So this is the level to which the irreverence took hold in Tehran. This is the night before the vote. Here's Ahmadinejad, and in Farsi it says "dictator goodbye," and they cross out his picture. And what was funny was they'd hold up this banner, and cars would drive by honking their horns. This actually is the very same square where years before we rescued that American flag, where we saw this American flag rescue. Here's just a last shot. Of course, we know what happened after 2009: street violence, protests, and that's what we're going to talk about now, just in terms of the Arabs. I'm not going to keep you too much longer. But regarding the Arab Spring, and this is why 2009 matters, because Iran's experience of this election in 2009 really was a formative experience for the Arab nations, which are now experiencing their own revolutions. To understand this properly, we need to go back to 1979, again, the Islamic Revolution, which for 3 decades in this region was the only one where you had a people power example of literally people on the streets overthrowing a regime. So this set the precedent, and for many, many years, Iranians, who I know would often describe, in quite arrogant terms, in fact, how pleased they were that their example of 1979 was a template for the whole world, of course, but not one that was really followed by their Arab neighbors. Because many Iranians look down on their Arab neighbors. Many Arab neighbors look with fear and trepidation at the Iranians. There are many, many reasons for this, going back for centuries. But Iranians have been very, very dismissive, partly because, and I must say as a journalist covering the Middle East for more than 2 decades now, it was pretty disheartening to see people, Iraqis, for example, sitting under Saddam decade after decade and doing nothing but sitting on their hands. We used to joke, I remember as journalists, we used to joke what it would be like if you were Iraqi, right? And you come of age, you're